large-scale, relentless bombing operations of American air forces gave the world convincing proof of the destructive power of our aircraft. But even while we were showering devastation upon the enemy, our huge bomber fleets were on their way to becoming obsolete. In 1944, a year before the war ended, a new and mighty weapon was in the most crucial phase of its development. A year later, in 1945, this weapon, the atomic bomb, became a reality. A great new force had come into being, one that brought World War II to an abrupt halt, one that was destined to change the whole character of warfare in the future. Much remained to be learned, however, about this newest and most deadly of weapons. So a long and elaborate series of tests was planned and undertaken by the armed services of the United States, in close cooperation first with Manhattan District, and later, after 1947, with the Atomic Energy Commission. In 1946, Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands was the scene of the first of these tests. This was Operation Crossroads. These islands in the Pacific, Bikini, Kwajalein, and Eniwetok, were chosen because no populated areas would be put in danger and because there was an ideal place in which to assemble the 93 naval vessels that were to form the target.
When we arrived at the islands, we saw signs of the heavy fighting that took place here. Little Japanese cemeteries reminded us of those terrific battles. Coming into Eniwetok Island, in the weeks preceding the bomb drop, were many C-54s, bringing men, supplies, and technical equipment. Operation Crossroads was to be a scientific experiment on a vast scale, both in the quantities of materiel and in the number of personnel. Many thousands of us, from all the armed services and civilian experts, were needed at the islands for the tests. Our air arm had the responsibility not only for logistics, but also for furnishing men and aircraft for the bomb drop, for gathering weather data aloft, for air rescue, for air photography of every phase of the operation, and for operating cloud sampling drones. Kwajalein was the base for our Crossroads B-29s. We needed them in many ways. Every one of them had an important assignment, and all were going to be aloft at H-hour on Able Day. Another chapter in the long and honorable history of the B-29. It was another B-29, the Outlaw, that brought General Curtis LeMay to the islands. He was then Deputy Chief of Air Staff for Research and Development. General LeMay is greeted by Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the Army Air Forces Task Group, under Major General William E. Kepner, Deputy Commander for Aviation for the whole operation.
Major Woodrow P. Swancutt, aircraft commander of Dave's Dream, the B-29 that is going to drop the test bomb, holds a final inspection of his crew just before takeoff. Dave's Dream takes off on an historic mission to drop the first atomic bomb directed against naval vessels. Aboard USS Mount McKinley, 14 miles from the target area, Vice Admiral William Blandy, in charge of the entire operation as commander of Task Force 1, and his staff are waiting for H-hour, the big moment when the bomb will fall. Dave's Dream, aloft and ready. Major Swancutt is at the controls, all set as his men are, for the bomb run when he gets the word. Major Harold E. Wood, the bombardier, ready to bring to a climax many months of preparation by a great many people. With Dave's Dream airborne, it's time for the B-17 drones to take off. They will be sent through the cloud mass after the detonation to pick up samples for radioactivity tests. At first, the drones are under control from the ground. Soon, the motherships will take over. Operation Crossroads combined all the features of a full-scale military operation and the conditions of a laboratory experiment of imposing proportions. The ground control pilot now turns the drones over to the mother aircraft. And there she is. More of the B-17 drones are moved toward the target area. The beeper pilot in the nose of the mother aircraft can see on his TV scope right into the cockpit of the drone. When he moves the control stick in the mothership, the controls in the drone respond. Two C-54s and 8 B-29s are aloft as photographic planes. The big blast is going to be well recorded. Converging on the target, which consists of battleships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers, submarines, merchantmen, and landing craft. Nearly time now for the bomb drop. A naval craft miles away, a wise precaution. H-hour is here. This is the first controlled and fully observed test of an atomic weapon dropped on a military target. The bombs dropped on Japan had ended a war, but we still lacked scientific information on blast pressure, heat, light, and radioactivity. About 8 minutes after the detonation of the Able Day bomb, the B-17s begin their run through the dangerous mushroom cloud. This is the sort of testing possible only under controlled conditions and after elaborate preparations. The drones are a complete success. After their runs through the atomic cloud, they return to base, controlled by mother planes from a distance up to 8 miles. Although the bomb drop was not a bullseye, 5 ships were sunk, one of them a cruiser, and there was heavy damage to many others. We had plenty of evidence that an A-bomb could effectively attack naval formations. Able Day was to be followed by Baker Day, when a submarine blast sank other ships of the target fleet. Operation Crossroads proved again that nuclear weapons had vitally changed the character of warfare. The B-17 drones return still under control of the mother aircraft. The ground control pilot takes over. The landings couldn't be better, even if pilots were aboard the aircraft. The radiological crew gingerly takes over the task of removing the contamination filters. These samples will reveal the exact gamma ray and neutron measurements within the atomic cloud. The filters are placed in lead shipping containers to be sent stateside to Los Alamos and other scientific laboratories for analysis and study. Any aircraft that has been in or near an atomic cloud will carry away some contamination. A washing down method was developed, which makes the cloud sampling aircraft safe and ready for service within 24 hours. Work went forward to convert these barren islands into a fully equipped military installation, with barracks, mess halls, observation posts, runways, a chapel, recreation facilities, and maintenance shops. Because before long, there were to be other A-bomb tests here. Operation Sandstone in 1948, and Operation Greenhouse in 1951.
Also, from 1951 on, for those of us who worked on the new A-bomb testing range in Nevada, another important program was in progress. We decided to find out what the effect of atomic bombs on grounded aircraft would be. So a number of airplanes, some of them obsolete, others of the latest types, were set up in the target area at various angles to the blast point. Test buildings were targets, too, some of them of sturdy construction. Aboard a C-54, a group of flight surgeon volunteers are about to test their visual reaction to the actual flare of an atomic blast, because it is important to learn the effect of terrifically brilliant atomic light on the eyes of aircraft crews. Examination proved that none of the flight surgeons suffered any permanent eye damage. test by test, we in the Air Force increased our knowledge of the new and fearsome weapon. And even while these tests continued, with improved and more powerful A-bombs, a new development of vast importance was in progress. In January 1950, it was revealed that President Truman had directed the Atomic Energy Commission to continue its work on a weapon of even more overwhelming destructive force, the thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb. Thus, it happened that after years of intensified effort by our scientists, the most terrible of all the weapons that man has ever built, the H-bomb, was detonated at Eniwetok. Let us hope that the time never comes when we must use it. But if that time does come, the men, the machines, and the know-how will all be a part of the readiness of the United States Air Force.
In the headquarters of the United States and Russian Joint Control Commission in Korea, there was a meeting soon after the victory over Japan of officers of the two occupying forces. Japanese troops north of the 38th parallel had surrendered to Russia, while south of the parallel, the Japanese had surrendered to the Americans. The atmosphere was deceptively friendly, considering what was going to happen later in Korea. The United States considered the dividing line along the 38th parallel to be only a temporary military convenience, but the Russians had other ideas. After the Japanese surrender, American and Russian soldiers in the area near the parallel could be seen for a short time behaving like buddies. This sort of thing didn't last long, because the Russian command was about to turn the dividing line into a part of the Iron Curtain. 2 years of effort proved that agreement with Russia on Korea was impossible. In 1947, the United States referred the whole problem to the United Nations. The response to the American action was that the General Assembly established a commission to supervise free elections in all of Korea. But the Russians had no intention of allowing such free elections in North Korea. In South Korea, the people turned out in great numbers when the elections were held in 1948. While Russia was setting up a communist regime in North Korea, these South Koreans were forming a constitutional republic and choosing a president. To this government, the United States soon turned over control of our occupied zone. American forces then began their withdrawal. By the middle of 1949, all had moved out except limited numbers for advice and observation. This meant that the Republic of Korea was going to have only a small army and a native constabulary, forces sufficient to keep order, but not to defend South Korea against military aggression on a large scale. By the middle of 1950, the North Koreans had a fully trained and equipped army. The Russians had seen to that. The day came when it was revealed what had all along been the communist plan, the invasion and seizure of South Korea. The invasion got underway on the morning of Sunday, June 25th, 1950. When they crossed the 38th parallel, the communist forces brought along artillery and tanks that had been supplied months before by the Russians. They began the invasion with 8 infantry divisions, 3 border constabulary brigades, and an armored brigade. The South Koreans fought back for a couple of days, and then their resistance collapsed. When the Soviet began this aggression by proxy, They didn't look for any active intervention by the United States or other nations. That was the Reds' big mistake. From Washington, 2 days after the invasion began, came President Truman's order that American air and sea forces were to go to the help of South Korea. Aircraft of the United States Far East Air Forces were sent at once to operational bases. From Guam, the B-29s took off for Okinawa, their base for the strike soon to be made against the North Korean invaders. Several F-80 squadrons in Japan were moved to southern Japanese airfields in order to put them within range of targets in Korea. A provisional fighter squadron of F-51s was soon ready to go into action from Daegu Airfield in South Korea. The conflict had hardly begun before our aircraft turned to the big job of keeping the South Koreans from being overrun and crushed at the very outset of hostilities. The North Korean troops were advancing almost unopposed, so our aircraft went to work on them. At first, we put a lot of emphasis on ground support of the badly outnumbered defenders. Within a few days, our F-80s were also going after the enemy's lines of supply. We had to slow up his logistics if we were going to keep the South Koreans from being driven off their peninsula. The F-51s, too, went to work on interdiction targets, as well as doing their share in the close support of ground troops. In fact, all of our aircraft gave a fine demonstration of the versatility of air forces. The thing we had to do was trade space for time and slow up the invading forces enough to allow a buildup of defensive strength. So we went on, hitting anything that was carrying or storing communist supplies. By now, less than a week after the war started, our airstrikes went well north of the 38th parallel. Communists had figured on having smoothly operating supply lines. We took out a lot of the smoothness, and we conducted these operations without effective opposition in the air, because as a first order of priority, our aircraft had destroyed the small but vicious North Korean Air Force. The hard-pressed South Koreans needed help on the ground. President Truman acted quickly. On June 30th, he ordered United States Army units into action. So here in Japan, troops of the 24th Division, part of our occupation forces, made ready to be flown to the Korean battle area in Air Force C-54s and C-47s. These were the first flights in what came to be the greatest combat airlift in history. This was the 4th of July, and the men of the 24th Division were not celebrating the day in quite the way they had planned. When the men of the 24th Division reached Korea, they were implementing the vote of the UN Security Council, which asked all member nations to help. Eventually, 15 other countries sent ground troops to Korea. But from the beginning, by far the largest share of the military burden was borne by the United States. The 24th Division troops were immediately sent to the battle line, not as a unit, but by the plane load. This was an emergency. The enemy had to be slowed up. Even without any support from the air, the North Koreans were a formidable force, well equipped and by far outnumbering the defenders. Piecemeal, the men of the 24th went up into the crumbling line. The enemy had a lot of firepower. They were a strong force, and the most our ground troops could hope for was a delaying action. Our troops needed close support from the air, and from the beginning, the F-80s and our other aircraft of all types supplied it. It was the only thing that prevented immediate disaster. Still, they came on, those North Koreans with their Russian-built tanks. For our people, there was only one thing to do: pull back, wait for a build-up, and turn a big part of the immediate operation over to our air forces. At best, it was going to be tough to keep a foothold on the peninsula. So, our air forces became the only effective offensive weapon we had in this early phase of the war. For weeks, the chief emphasis was on close support of ground forces. Even the B-29s shared in this job, a new one for these big bombers. The rules had to be forgotten if the North Korean Army was to be held at all. The versatility of air forces was proved as never before. When the war was about a month old, we could divert the B-29s and other aircraft to more interdiction raids to keep the enemy's supply routes under attack. By this time, we were beginning to take care of the limited number of strategic targets in North Korea. We were doing a good job in slowing up the enemy's progress southward by destroying today the supplies he had counted on using tomorrow. But it remained true for about 6 weeks that a major part of our air effort was still in close support. Our B-29s included 2 strategic air command wings that left the United States soon after the conflict began and were flying combat missions only 9 days later, adding their bombing strength to that of our Far East Air Forces. There had been thorough mobility planning for just such an emergency. In mid-August 1950, a month and a half after the invasion began, the famous Pusan perimeter was established. The big withdrawal was over. This far and no farther. The UN ground troops began digging in. The enemy had come far and fast, but now he was running out of steam and was soon going to find things a lot tougher. During the defense of the perimeter, the F-51s had a large share in carrying on with close support and thereby keeping the communists pinned down. The enemy drive had been halted, but there were still North Koreans out there in the hills, and we gave them no rest. It was one of the jobs of our versatile air forces to wipe out machine gun nests that in a normal war would have been targets for mortars. Interdiction was stepped up. We staged about 150 such strikes every day and smashed nearly 90% of the supplies the enemy was trying to bring up. His routes were so extended that we had plenty of targets. This was our chance to soften up the whole communist war effort while our ground forces were building up inside the perimeter. The first phase of the war was over. Thanks largely to our air effort, the United Nations was still in there fighting. It was a peculiar war, but the problems were not proving too much for the United States Air Force. In the summer of 1950, recruits for the Air Force were arriving at training bases in increasing numbers. There was a mean war on, over in Korea, and so far things weren't going well for our side. The Reds were pushing our ground forces all the way back to the Pusan perimeter. Our air strength was proving the biggest single factor in keeping us from being driven off the peninsula. That air strength had to be kept up and increased. This called for a program of intensive training in all phases of maintenance and operation. Naturally, there was a lot of emphasis on the training of pilots. When the Red suddenly struck in Korea in June 1950, our problem in logistics was immediate and tremendous. For this was a war on the other side of the biggest of oceans. Supplies for our ground forces as well as our air forces had to be airlifted in huge quantities every day. The Military Air Transport Service, under the skilled command of Lieutenant General Lawrence S. Cuter, met all requirements efficiently and continuously. The Pacific Airlift was a well-oiled engine of supply. The civilian airlines were called on for help, and at once turned over 66 transport aircraft and their crews to be used in the airlift. Before long, there were 206 airplanes in operation, including the converted civilian airliners and aircraft of the Military Air Transport Service. It was the biggest wartime operation of its kind in history. By September 1950, when the Korean conflict was 3 months old, the MATS Pacific Airlift was averaging 250,000 airplane miles per day. The Pacific Airlift transports landed their cargoes in Japan in 30 or more flights every day. From here, it was the job of the Combat Cargo Command, organized and commanded by Major General William H. Tunner, to haul men and supplies to the Korean battle zone. While our ground forces were being driven back to the Busan perimeter, our overall strength was fast building up, and a vital part of that strength was in the more than 100 tons of supplies that MATS was delivering every day. One day late in August of this fateful year of 1950, a C-47 from Japan arrived at the Daegu airfield inside the Busan perimeter. Our big push to the north was in preparation, and there was to be a conference of top-level commanders representing all three of the armed services. The naval group was headed by Admiral Joy and Vice Admiral Struble, commander of Joint Task Force 7. Our air strength was represented by the commander of the 5th Air Force, Major General Partridge, and by Lieutenant General Stratemeyer, head of the Far East Air Forces with headquarters in Tokyo. Lieutenant General I.H. Edwards, acting Deputy Chief of Staff, Operations USAF, came from Washington for the conference. In the air action that followed, in the 10 days or so just before the Incheon landing, the workhorses were the B-29s. We had 140 of them ready for business. Their mission was twofold: to neutralize the enemy ground forces that still surrounded the Busan perimeter in considerable numbers, and to attack all Korean airfields in enemy hands. Our air forces flew more than 3,000 sorties in the week before the Incheon operation. In a huge area around Incheon, the B-29s went after marshalling yards, tunnels, rail lines, anything useful to enemy logistics. These Air Force operations left the Reds without any hope of reinforcing or supporting their defenses at Incheon. We were practically unopposed in the air, for we had long since effectively disposed of the Red air strength, which was not going to be troublesome until the MiGs appeared later in the year. There was effective bombing of targets of all descriptions. This was the Air Force's way of helping MacArthur in his magnificent operation at Incheon, which was about to begin. On the morning of 15 September 1950, at Incheon, on Korea's west coast, 150 miles behind the front at the Busan perimeter, our naval elements went to work to soften up the Red defenses. An unpleasant surprise for the invaders who had taken over nearly the whole peninsula. A 29-foot tide had to be reckoned with in the deployment of the landing craft. General MacArthur witnessed the landing of the 1st Marine Division and the 7th U.S. Infantry Division. The Air Force had done its part by its hammering of the enemy's ground forces, supply lines, and airfields. On the day following the landing at Incheon, the UN forces hemmed in for a month at the perimeter around Busan broke through. Up to now, the Reds had done all the advancing. Now, it was our turn. Our ground forces at the perimeter were now formidable. We had 4 U.S. infantry divisions, 7 South Korean divisions, and 1 British brigade. At the beginning of the war, our ground forces had had a tough time, but now everything was going as we wanted it to. Our air effort paved the way for this rapid advance. It had completely knocked out enemy aircraft and airfields. Our troops had nothing to fear from Red air action. There wasn't much effective opposition of any kind, as our forces went on to retake the South Korean capital city of Seoul. There was soon to be a large-scale join-up of our ground forces that landed at Incheon with those that had come up from the Busan perimeter for the advance to the Yalu River. There was still some scattered resistance from the Reds as our men moved farther to the north. In clearing out enemy rearguard units, our people were getting good cooperation from the South Koreans.
After the Incheon landing, aircraft of the Combat Cargo Command came through with a tremendous contribution to the success of the whole campaign. What's going to happen is that C-47s and C-119s will pull off one of the best managed airdrops in combat history. And they're going to do it in enemy territory, about 30 miles north of the captured North Korean capital, Pyongyang. And not only troops, ammunition, and food, but jeeps, trucks, and howitzers are going to be delivered in this big drop. The first time in combat history for big stuff, as well as paratroopers and their supplies to be delivered by air in the same drop operation. The objective is to trap as many of the retreating enemy as possible and to strengthen our continued advance to the Yalu. Nearly 4,000 paratroopers and their supplies are going to be dropped in the 4-day operation, along with a great deal of heavy equipment. Exercise Swarmer, held earlier in the year in South Carolina, had been a valuable rehearsal for this operation in Korea. Although at the time, nobody realized that the game was going to be played for keeps so soon. On 1 November 1950, enemy air suddenly re-entered the war in a dangerous way. In other words, the Russian-built MiG-15s made their debut in Korea. our F-80s take on the MiGs. F-86s have been sent for, but in the meantime, the F-80s do all right. It was in an F-80 that Lieutenant Russell Brown shot down the first MiG, the first of many. Cameras mounted on the wings of our fighters automatically photographed the air battle. As fighting aircraft, the F-80s were decidedly inferior to the MiGs, but our old jets were much better handled. The F-80s more than held their own because of the superior skill of our pilots.
Only a little more than a month after the breakthrough at the perimeter and the Incheon landing, virtually all of Korea was in our hands. MacArthur's end-of-war offensive had gone splendidly. More than 100,000 prisoners were taken by our ground forces in the first 5 months of the war. A lot of them had frozen feet. It can be mighty cold in the upper reaches of North Korea in late November. Some of our forces got to the Yalu, but this was the terminus of the drive. Policy at the highest level forbade any advance or airstrikes beyond the river. Besides, the Chinese were now in the war. We were faced by 250,000 of them. Pretty soon, there was going to be what MacArthur called an entirely new war.
The decisive force so far in the Korean conflict was our air power, in spite of the fact that at this time, December 1950, our Air Force was still suffering from the economy budgets that followed World War II. And in the new war, with a new enemy that was about to begin, our side never lost the supremacy of the air. It was safely in the hands of the United States Air Force.
November 1950, after the big push into North Korea by United Nations forces, elements of the 17th U.S. Infantry reached a point on the Yalu River. This, the border of Manchuria, was the objective of MacArthur's End the War campaign. Everything had been going well for our side since the Incheon landing and the breakthrough at the Pusan perimeter in mid-September. And then something happened. The Chinese came into the war. Suddenly, the effective enemy strength increased about 300%. The word came that all United Nations ground forces were to withdraw southward. As General MacArthur put it, this was an entirely new war. By now, we were opposed by great masses of Chinese troops and were greatly outnumbered. A rapid retreat to the south had to be made in the face of this massive threat. The enemy push was about to carry him all the way to below Seoul in South Korea, his second big attempt to push us off the peninsula.
The C-119s operating from Ashia Air Base in southern Japan airdropped supplies to our withdrawing ground forces. Operations possible only because our air forces maintained air superiority. All through this period of retreat, the boxcars dropped much-needed ammunition, food, and medical supplies, as well as heavy stuff such as vehicles and artillery pieces. When our ground forces were compelled to pull back, the United Nations air power became the only means of effectively opposing the advance of the formidable Chinese army. This was the last week of November 1950 and the first half of December. The F-80s went up and hit the enemy close to our line. And there were also a great many interdiction and reconnaissance missions. It was our air strength again, as it was at the beginning of the conflict 6 months before.
that prevented the envelopment of our withdrawing ground forces. The enemy was slowed down because we inflicted a tremendous number of casualties among his personnel, and because we kept on hitting his increasingly extended supply line. This went on until, in mid-December 1950, we were able to stabilize a line near the 38th parallel. In 1 month, our air forces flew more than 11,000 combat sorties. At this time, the middle of December 1950, our F-86s went into action against the MiGs. And now began one of the brightest chapters in the story of our air forces in the Korean conflict. Here we are in the pilot briefing room of an F-86 squadron.
Hello, fighter sweep today. This area right here. We'll start engines as indicated on the board. Here's the plan. Tiger flight, you take off, up to this area here, right on up to here, where you make a right turn, come about 30 miles inland, look back in. Eagle flight, you follow Tiger, you come up this area here, up this point here where you make a left turn, look back in. The last two flights, Wolf and Robin, will take off and come up the center. This point here, where they'll cut right up in to the Yarrow River, cutting short of the Yarrow, where they'll split, one doing a right turn, and Wolf will make a left turn. Now, the first 4 flights into the area will stay below the contrails and keep a close watch on the fighter bombers. The last 2 flights will go above the contrails and check very closely for any MiG aircraft that might come in above the con. Now, if you see MiGs up there today, call them out. Give their altitude, direction, and geographical location on the map. And call it out and then get off the radio. Now, remember, once you look around, keep your speed up. And if you do get a bounce, cut him off and drive in range. When you get in range, shoot. And when you shoot, shoot to kill. Anybody got any questions? Okay, let's go get them.
Now for MiG Alley, that wide band of airspace over northwest Korea infested by the enemy jets. F-86s had this great advantage over the Russian-built MiGs. They were better handled. Simply as aircraft, the MiGs were at least the equal of the F-86s, and the enemy had a lot of them. They usually outnumbered the F-86s, sometimes by as much as 3 or 4 to 1. But our pilots were much more skillful than theirs. This was the big reason that we destroyed 8 times as many of their fighters as they did of ours. During the entire war, 827 MiGs were down. We lost 112 jet aircraft in air-to-air combat.
Tiger 2 here, got a couple of bogeys out there, one coming around is too low. Roger, boy, I got him. All right, there he goes, he's going down, you got him? All right, boy, that's a good deal. Watch it, we got 2 of them coming in here on us at 7 o'clock, hang on. All right, I haven't got him, but go ahead and take it, and I'll cover you. All right, I'm going in now. Okay, he's down, but you got him too.
January 1951, the United Nations ground forces mounted a counterattack from the line of their furthest withdrawal. They pounded their way from below the 38th parallel and through the Iron Triangle. By June, the Reds were ready for an armistice. The battle line of mid-June was to remain more or less stabilized throughout the coming peace talks. In this building at Kaesong, the truce negotiations began in July 1951. A couple of weeks previously, the Russian delegate to the United Nations had made it clear that the Reds had had enough. General Nam Il of the North Korean Army was the spokesman for the enemy. The United Nations delegation was headed by Vice Admiral Joy of the United States Navy and included Major General Craigie of the Air Force, General Paik Son-yup of the South Korean Army, and Rear Admiral Burke. After a year of fighting, there now began 2 years of talk. But during all that time, air assaults on the enemy were going to continue. After 21 months of dispute, chiefly over the problem of prisoners, an agreement was reached, at least on the exchange of sick and wounded. In April 1953, Operation Little Switch began. To Panmunjom, communist ambulances brought, at the rate of 100 a day, about 600 United Nations prisoners. Little Switch, this operation, was followed some months later by Big Switch, the large-scale exchange of the rest of the prisoners. Shortly after Little Switch got underway, the Reds were eager to resume the armistice talks, which had been suspended by the exasperated United Nations delegation the preceding autumn. All through the nearly 2 years of wrangling at Kaesong, our air forces had been hammering away at the enemy ground forces and communications and airfields and transport. The communists were ready to quit. So at Panmunjom on 27 July 1953, the Korean conflict ends, not in a peace, but in a ceasefire, an armed truce. Lieutenant General William K. Harrison, chief negotiator for the United Nations, signs the agreement, followed by General Nam Il for the North Koreans. So ended a mean war. But for the first time, communist designs on the free world had been stopped by military force. This was something that had to be done. And in its achievement, a large share of the credit belongs to the United States Air Force.
The success of our jet pilots stands forth boldly in the records. 39 of them became aces in the Korean conflict. Each of the 39 destroyed 5 or more enemy MiGs. To name only a few, Lieutenant Colonel George A. Davis, Jr., 14 MiGs destroyed. Captain Joseph McConnell, Jr., 16 kills. Colonel Royal N. Baker, 13 MiGs downed. Captain Harold Fisher, Jr., 10 destroyed. Major Manuel J. Fernandez, 14 and a half kills. Colonel Francis S. Gabreski, 6 and a half, on top of his 31 kills over Germany. Major James Jibera, 1st Korean ace, 15 enemy jets destroyed. Colonel Harrison Thing, 5 MiGs downed. Captain Ivan C. Kinchelow, 5 kills. Colonel James K. Johnson, 10 MiGs destroyed. To our 39 Korean aces, indeed to all of our pilots who took part in the air battle, go praise and honor from us all. Splendidly, they upheld the national cause and the highest standards of the United States Air Force.
American air power was the decisive factor in preventing a communist victory in Korea. the Korean conflict, the Cold War went right on. All along, it had been only too obvious that ever since World War II, the Soviets had been building their military strength. Their threat of world domination was real, and it was increasing all the time. To this threat had to be air power, a greatly expanded Air Force. Upon it depended the security of the U.S. and of the free world. Because the Soviet threat was worldwide, our air power had to have global range and be instantly ready to respond. In the decade of the 1950s, the Air Force gained this objective, an achievement that stands as one of the most remarkable in military history. Our means of facing up to the Soviet menace took various forms. For one thing, we retained our bases in the Pacific, such as this one on the island of Guam, which had served so well in World War II and during the Korean conflict. Here we see an example of another element of the new strength we gained in this period after the Korean War: modern aircraft. This is our B-47, the jet medium-range bomber that became the dependable workhorse of Strategic Air Command. The B-47 was the world's first operational jet bomber. Its 6 jet engines give it a speed of more than 600 miles per hour. It has a ceiling of over 40,000 feet and an unrefueled range of over 3,000 miles. The B-47 was an admirable modern replacement for the good old B-29. The Soviets, too, as we knew very well, were developing formidable modern military aircraft. They had good bombers. They had their MiGs and other excellent fighters. And they made a point of showing the world that they had a modern arsenal. There was plenty of strength in the threat that faced us. To Western Europe had resulted in 1949 in the formation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The United States, as a leading member, contributed heavily to NATO's air power. In Britain, in Germany, and for other examples, in France and in Turkey. In addition to NATO, the U.S. supplied air power to other parts of the world: the Far East, the Middle East, and the top of the world. Countering the threat of Soviet atomic power, on our side, we've thoroughly established the function of the Strategic Air Command as our chief deterrent to attack from any quarter on the globe. In 1955, we had ready the B-52 Stratofortress, which we see here on snow-covered Loring Air Force Base in Maine, one of the far-flung system of SAC bases. The B-52 is a true intercontinental bomber with an unrefueled range of more than 6,000 miles. It is a carrier of nuclear weapons, and it can be equipped with formidable air-to-ground missiles. Here at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska is where the Strategic Air Command's powerful round-the-clock readiness is controlled. Here is the command post for every SAC base, for all of SAC's men, all its aircraft, and its missiles throughout the world. Here is the nerve center of a truly global striking force. It was in this decade of the 1950s that missiles were brought into the family of weapons of aerospace warfare. It was a revolutionary development that had the most profound effect on international relations, on the minds of men everywhere, on national objectives, and on military planning, where missiles made necessary a new concept of aerospace power, the mixed force. Manned aircraft, now so powerful and reliable, would still be indispensable. But now we needed the advantages of missiles too. And after long and hard effort, we had them. At a number of our overseas installations, we had the Matador, a limited-range missile that gave a new kind of capability to our tactical forces. Our British allies established bases for the use of the Thor, our own Air Force intermediate-range ballistic missile. And from stateside installations, the Atlas, our first intercontinental ballistic missile, became ready for use under control of the Strategic Air Command. We had a complementary weapon to be used against any target which we could foresee in potentially hostile nations, no matter how far distant. Our worldwide Air Force derives its strength from many sources. We had our missiles, ready to deliver deadly counterblows upon any antagonist who dared to attack us. We had our modern bomber force, poised at widely scattered bases to deliver a nuclear counterattack if war was forced upon us. We had the fast and versatile fighter aircraft of our tactical forces, stationed at home and overseas, to bolster our readiness and flexibility. We had our many thousands of officers and airmen, many of them highly trained specialists in technical and scientific fields. We had hundreds of thousands of people in industrial plants who worked in support of air power. We had our our wealth of electronic and mechanical devices to help our men and aircraft get the job done. And we had our pool of scientific know-how devoted to the direction and accomplishment of Air Force research. What does it all add up to? All of these elements have a single goal: to keep the United States all-powerful in the air. The great and central objective of preserving peace by deterring those who might plan to dominate us, and by being strong enough to win any war that might be forced upon us. When we look at modern missiles, now so vital to national strength and survival, it is startling to remember that such a tremendous and revolutionary development is so recent, largely since World War II. But the beginnings were much earlier, during World War I. That was when the bug was planned, partly under the supervision of Orville Wright and a young officer who later became General Hap Arnold. The bug was a small pilotless airplane with a conventional engine and a built-in guidance system. It was intended to carry a TNT bomb, and though it was never used in combat, it was in fact a guided missile, our first. The development of the modern missile had to wait for the beginning of the right kind of propulsion. And this again was the work of an American, Dr. Robert H. Goddard. In 1926 in Massachusetts, he achieved the first firing of a liquid fuel rocket. It reached an altitude of only 184 feet, but it was the first demonstration of the techniques that later gave us long-range missiles and the launchings of satellites and the sending of vehicles into space. Goddard was the father of modern rocketry, but it was a long time before the significance of his work was appreciated by his countrymen. During the 1930s, Goddard was in New Mexico, working largely by himself and without government support. In his research and experiments, he did not have military missiles in mind. His objective and his achievement was a propulsion system that could send rockets to high altitudes. It took years for the United States to get around to making military use of Goddard's ideas. So, during World War II, the guided missiles used by our Army Air Forces were unpowered bomb carriers, launched from aircraft and controlled by radio. Another type was the Weary Willie, a dispensable conventional aircraft loaded with TNT. Without a pilot, it was guided to its target by radio control. Such weapons were valuable as a phase of development, but they were far from being missiles in the modern sense. What really woke everybody up, including America, was the deadly use by the Germans of the V-1 and the V-2. In 1936, they had started their Peenemünde project to develop missiles of an entirely new type. In other words, they had been hard at it in a period when little official notice was given to modern military rocketry in the United States. Still, it was 8 years before the Germans were ready to fire their new missiles, and their first one was not a rocket. It was the buzz bomb, the V-1. Its propulsion was by pulse jet engine. The Germans fired more than 7,000 of them, of which more than 2,000 reached London, causing many thousands of casualties and vast damage. But the V-1 was slow, a good target for anti-aircraft artillery or fighter planes. Nearly 4,000 of them were brought down. In September of that same year, 1944, the Germans also began their firings of the vastly superior V-2, which was powered by a real liquid fuel engine. Military rockets in a rudimentary form had been used for centuries, but their propulsion was by the use of gunpowder. In this new era, it was the Germans who realized that the liquid fuel rocket could be put to military use, that it could be given impressive range and great destructive power. Thus, the advent of the V-2 had great historical significance, for with it, modern military missiles entered a new phase. More than 1,100 fell on England. They not only took a toll of more than 9,000 casualties, they also had a devastating psychological effect. For unlike the buzz bomb, the V-2 fell without warning. It had a speed of 3,300 miles per hour, and it could not be intercepted by fighter aircraft or brought down by anti-aircraft artillery. The V-2 blasted open a new era. But the Germans have always admitted that they could not have brought off this achievement without the research and example of the American Goddard. At the end of World War II, captured V-2 missiles and components were brought to the United States. Good use was made of them at White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. Reassembled and modified V-2s were tremendously valuable teaching tools in what was soon to become a vigorous American effort to enter the rocket missile age.
3, 2, 1, 0.
In World War II, we had already used several types of small rocket-driven weapons. And in Korea, the Air Force again used such weapons launched from aircraft against targets either on the ground or in the air. And before long, we had others, including the Falcon, a fast, accurate, and powerful guided missile launched from our interceptor aircraft. The Genie, an unguided weapon, is the first air-to-air missile that carries a nuclear warhead. It, too, is launched from Air Force fighter aircraft. The Matador was the Air Force's first successful ground-to-ground guided missile. It is boosted off by a rocket, and then a turbojet engine takes over. Electronically controlled by ground personnel, the Matador is a reliable tactical missile that can be armed with a nuclear warhead. The Mace is an improved version of the Matador, larger, faster, and of greater range. Our first answer to the need for a long-range strategic missile was the Snark. Again, a jet pilotless aircraft started on its flight by rocket boosters. The Snark was the world's first intercontinental missile. It had a range of about 5,000 miles. pilotless interceptor, the Air Force Beaumont. A guided missile launched from the ground and capable of destroying approaching hostile bombers hundreds of miles from our shores at very high altitudes. It gained much importance in plans for the defense of our borders. After the launching by a rocket, it is powered at supersonic speed by twin ramjet engines. All through the period of missile development in the 1950s, the concept of the mixed force was evolving. That is, we of course needed and for years would continue to need manned aircraft. Vastly improved bombers, capable of delivering nuclear weapons, became ready for use. The B-47 as a highly dependable modern medium bomber, and the B-52 as a fine long-range bomber, like the B-47, a source of the Strategic Air Command's great deterrent strength. For a considerable period, each of the two systems, manned aircraft and ballistic missiles, would have its own marked advantages. But while the successful use of bombers depends to some extent on tactics and countermeasures, a ballistic missile, with its hypersonic speed, can reach its target with small risk of interception by enemy aircraft. It was a most promising partner to the long-range bomber. So, in the 1950s, we embarked on one of the greatest crash programs in our history, for the development of intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles. With the Thor, the Air Force had its first intermediate range missile. It began a series of successful launchings in 1957 and was destined to win a place for itself in the arsenal of the free world. Besides being a good military missile, the Thor has been used with great success as a booster for satellites and space probes. The Air Force is rightly proud of the Thor. Test missiles were of immense value in the accelerated program for the development of an intercontinental missile. The X-10, though driven by turbojet engines, taught us much about aerodynamic design for missiles with supersonic speed and about automatic guidance. And the X-17, a three-stage test missile, revealed much needed information on nose cone design. It saved a lot of time and money in solving problems of re-entry at high speed and consequent high temperatures. In 1955, the highest national priority was given, by order of the President, to the development of the Atlas. Late in 1957, the Air Force achieved the first successful launching of this giant. Some months later, when the Atlas was fully tested, our country took on new confidence in its missile capability. The Atlas became a vital part of our military strength, and other formidable missiles, such as Titan and Minuteman, were in the research and testing stage. In the short span of 40 years, we had progressed from the bug, small, slow, feeble, uncertain, and certainly primitive, to powerful, long-range, supersonic rocket-powered missiles. A tremendous technical achievement by many thousands of people in and out of uniform who labored in the interests of the United States Air Force. In July 1955, These young men had the high privilege of becoming the first cadets of the United States Air Force Academy. The scene was Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado, temporary home of the Academy, pending construction of the permanent buildings near Colorado Springs. These fledgling cadets come from all parts of the country. Some from big cities, some from small towns, some from farms. But they all have important things in common. They were all chosen from among many applicants. They all had to meet the Academy's exacting mental and physical standards. They all have a lot of hard work ahead of them, and they are all ambitious to qualify as Air Force officers. The establishment of an Air Force Academy, as a national necessity, had long been urged by such distinguished and dedicated officers as General Spaatz, General Kepner, General Mitchell, General Vandenberg, General Doolittle, and General Arnold. As General Nathan Twining, then Chief of Staff of the Air Force, pointed out at the dedication ceremony, a modern Air Force must have an unfailing source of young officers, specially and intensively educated. That dream was now coming true. A lot of work was going on at the Academy's permanent location in the foothills of the Rampart Range of the Rocky Mountains, 8 miles north of Colorado Springs. Here were 17,800 acres, chosen after a long study to be the site of the new academy. Already there was a model to show how magnificent and modern it was going to be. There was a big day in August 1958 when the cadet wing, now 4 classes strong, moved from Lowry Air Force Base to the brand new academy. Those men we saw enrolling 3 years ago are now beginning their 4th and final year. They will be the class of 1959, the first to graduate. They are given a good deal of responsibility in directing the activities of the lower classmen. Academy tradition and standards are safe in their hands. They are nearly full-fledged officers now, and are accepted as such. The entire establishment is as modern as air power itself. Surrounding the Court of Honor are splendid buildings, all named in honor of Air Force heroes, where the cadets pass a major part of their lives for 4 busy years. Harmon Hall is the administration center, named for General Hubert R. Harmon, the Academy's first superintendent. This is where the cadets are quartered, Vandenberg Hall, 6 stories high and a quarter-mile long, named in honor of General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. There is living space here for the entire cadet wing, more than 2,000 strong. Here the cadets, 2 to a room, do all of their sleeping, much of their studying, and all of their own housework, in a setting that is an interesting combination of Spartan simplicity and modern design. And no one has a chance to forget that this is part of a military installation. Fairchild Hall, the academic building, houses classrooms, lecture halls, laboratories, the Academy Library, the Cadet Dispensary, and the offices of the Dean of Faculty and the Commandant of Cadets. It was named in honor of General Muir S. Fairchild. The The cadets are thoroughly schooled in basic and applied sciences: mathematics, physics, chemistry, engineering, aerodynamics, and astronautics. And there is an equally heavy workload in the humanities and social sciences, in courses that include history, English, foreign languages, geography, philosophy, psychology, economics, and political science. The balance between the strictly scientific and the more generalized studies was established because an officer in a modern Air Force must have not only a complete technical grasp of his job, he must also feel at home in the overall political and diplomatic pattern of which any military organization is now a part. The teaching staff is entirely military. The instructors are all Air Force career officers, highly experienced, qualified specialists in their various fields. Cadets who are exceptionally good students are given a chance to take additional courses in what is called the enrichment program. The program enables such cadets to advance as fast as their abilities permit and to broaden their field of study. Also in Fairchild Hall is one of the most complete military libraries in the world. Every competent and resourceful officer must possess skill in the techniques of research and study. The many thousands of books and documents in the Academy Library provide the cadets with the tools they need for acquiring this skill. Significant of the recognition that came belatedly to General Billy Mitchell was the naming in his honor of the Academy Dining Hall. Mitchell Hall can seat the entire cadet wing. Like almost everything else at the Academy, attendance here is mandatory. It is also extremely voluntary, for these are healthy young men who like to eat and who need a food-fueling station for the building of healthy bodies to endure the pressures of an exacting career. They were selected as cadets partly for their physical fitness, and one way they are kept in tip-top condition is by the intramural sports program. It's a part of the curriculum, and participation is compulsory, though as young Americans, they would of course go in for this sort of thing anyway. These sports are family affairs. There are also the outside contests, with teams representing the Academy in intercollegiate games. In football, the Academy has made an excellent showing against major opposition. For the limited time a cadet has for such things, there is Arnold Hall, the Academy Social Center, named for General Hap Arnold, affectionately and admiringly remembered as one of the greatest figures in Air Force history. It would have gratified him to know that Arnold Hall was to be such a pleasant part of cadet life. The Academy's upperclassmen go on summer field trips, not only to Air Force installations at home, but to military installations of our overseas allies. This indoctrination in what our foreign friends are doing, and the chance of seeing other countries, adds a valuable dimension to their education as officers in keeping with the role of our Air Force in world affairs. Planned that in the summer between their junior and senior years, all cadets will take a pilot indoctrination course, and as seniors, members of the first class, they may go on with such indoctrination if they choose. It is not obligatory. These Ladder cadets will qualify for solo flying, and a major portion of each graduating class will go on to regular training as Air Force pilots.
In June 1959 came the Academy's first graduation review, a scene that will be repeated year after year for as long as the nation needs an Air Force. And that will be a long time. About 300 of those young men we saw enrolling at Lowry Air Force Base 4 years ago will become, at tomorrow's graduation exercises, second lieutenants and bachelors of science.
The undergraduate phase of their education is now over. After tours of duty and various Air Force assignments, and following their eventual promotion, many of these young men will be chosen to go on with advanced education in one or more of the graduate schools of Air University in Alabama. Already the Academy has given them a splendid start in the long and continuing process of becoming modern, professional military officers, a prime need of our country and a dependable source of strength in the United States Air Force. In 1950, the Air Force launched an intensive study of the human factors involved in spaceflight. By then, we had solved such mechanical problems as vehicle design, guidance, tracking, and re-entry techniques. Now, through 1960, we sought to determine if a 1G oxygen-breathing creature, accustomed to the protection of the Earth's atmosphere, could survive in the hostile environment of space. The problems encountered were both physiological and psychological. Could an active man function in spacecraft type high carbon dioxide content air? Dr. Bruno Balk and others of the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine exercised in a sealed chamber at 11,000 feet altitude on Mount Evans, Colorado. He breathed air that had been given a 12% CO2 content. Sea level normal is 1/30th of 1%. The findings of the experiments indicated that man could increase his ability to cope with high altitude through conditioning, and that space pioneers must possess physical stamina and great emotional stability. Weightlessness in space flight was given great attention. The human nervous system, blood circulation, and muscular control are normally adjusted to the influence of gravity at low altitudes, what we call 1G. Here, the absence of gravity was created in a fast C-131, flying a path in which, for a brief time, centrifugal force is exactly balanced by the Earth's gravitational pull. The men are in a state of free fall. They feel no gravity. Psychological reaction to this strange state of affairs varied considerably. But the test proved that during the period of zero gravity, man could retain his ability to use his arms and legs. Potential astronauts undergo this experience of weightlessness. A float in a crystal ball told the pilot of the C-131 when he attained the right speed and flight path to produce zero-G. In orbit in Mercury capsules, they will be in a weightless state for hours, not a mere 15 seconds. But here they begin to get used to the strange sensation of zero-G. Man's neuromuscular coordination in the weightless state was determined by studies in other flights. In an MC-2 full-pressure suit, this man occupied a chamber designed to simulate the temperatures which the crew of a space vehicle would experience at hypersonic speed during re-entry of the Earth's atmosphere. Quartz tube infrared lamps raised temperatures 100 degrees a minute. As specialists of the Aerospace Medical Research Laboratory studied skin and body temperatures, pulse rate, and heart reaction. This helped determine the limits of heat stress on human beings and the protection needed in spaceflight. During the test, the chamber temperature was raised to 500 degrees. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, from 7 through 15 April 1960, Courtney Metzger, research scientist, volunteered to spend 7 full days in an airtight capsule in order to test life-sustaining space equipment in a simulated space environment. He communicated by squawk box with observers outside the capsule. As men must do in spacecraft, he took his food from tubes. The water he drank was under pressure. He maintained his muscular tone by exercise. Throughout the 7 days, the temperature, moisture, and oxygen levels within the capsule were recorded. In good shape at the end of a full week in the capsule, he was congratulated by Colonel John Stapp, famed for his historic sled runs at Holloman Air Force Base. Then there was a much longer test of how men will react to prolonged stays in the environment of space. From 15 August through 15 September 1960, Captain John J. Hargreaves and Captain William B. Hablutzel spent 30 days, 8 hours, and 21 minutes in a space cabin simulator at the School of Aerospace Medicine. They had a supply of 80 pounds of pre-cooked, dehydrated food and an oxygen system. They shared the duty of continuously manning the control panel 24 hours a day. And they ate, slept, and kept house in this 8x12 sealed cabin for a whole month. Outside the cabin, instruments recorded their physiological and psychological reactions. Findings of the long and trying ordeal indicated that men can maintain efficiency during extended space flights. At Wright Air Development Division, a spacesuit was developed to provide part of the protective and life-sustaining equipment that a space traveler would need. This man, in an altitude chamber, is not only wearing the full pressure suit that he will need in the near vacuum of space, but on his back he carries a pack that supplies him with oxygen by a new system. Hoses recycle his breath through the pack. Carbon dioxide and moisture are removed. Pure oxygen is added, and his breath is returned to him to be breathed again. A striking feature is that the equipment is free from attachments to the spaceship's own oxygen system. This means that the wearer could move outside the vehicle into space, taking with him the oxygen he needs. G loads that men must endure during the acceleration and deceleration of space vehicles have been under study since the early 1950s and became a matter of general interest when Colonel Stapp made his famous ride in 1954. At Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, sled runs carried man and animals into extreme G-load conditions, more than men will ever be required to experience in actual spaceflight. During each run, instrumentation recorded data on rates of acceleration and deceleration and on the peak G-loads. It was not unusual to sustain G-loads from 25 plus to 45 plus. An extraordinary event occurred in 1958 when Captain Eli L. Beading of the Air Force, a program task scientist, took a perilous ride that subjected him for 0.04 of a second to 82.6 Gs. The limit of tolerance of G forces was proved to be high. Another significant factor explored during the 1950s was the effect of cosmic radiation on the space traveler. To verify information gathered in numerous animal balloon flights, Air Force Major David Simons in 1957 ascended to 102,000 feet in a semi-sealed cabin. He suffered no adverse effects from radiation. Tests with animals were of great value. Chimpanzees are the best adapted to tests under space conditions because their liver, heart, and intestines are in the same location as in man. At Holloman Air Force Base, a large colony of these intelligent animals was maintained by the Air Force Aerospace Medical Laboratory. They were given the best of care. They became trusting and friendly with the veterinarians who had them in charge. They submitted willingly to test flights. They learned to perform complex tasks in manipulating an instrument panel. They willingly cooperated in tests made in the Space Environmental Chamber, while technicians checked their pulse, blood pressure, temperature, and respiration rate, and while the chimp was working as he might when in orbit. Men who go into space must be equipped to survive launch and re-entry G-load, long periods of weightlessness, low pressures, and other factors of the hostile environment in which he will find himself. Before these risks can be faced, an immense amount of research and testing must be accomplished. Major parts of this research were conducted during the 1950s, ably and progressively by the United States Air Force.